Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Faces In FinOps Podcast, powered by Prosperos. I'm your host, John Meyer. Now, the Faces In FinOps Podcast is all about highlighting thought leaders in the cloud financial management space and insights on how they're making an impact not only within their organization, but within the broader FinOps community. Now, before we get started, how about we give our guests a moment to introduce themselves?
Hey, John, I'm Bryson Walpus. I've been working at AWS now for nearly 7 years, coming up at the end of Q2, and I've been in the customer-facing cost optimization and cloud financial space that entire time.
Bryson, you've been at AWS for almost 7 years. Wow, that's a very long time.
I've survived. It's a great company.
Well, let's talk about what do you do at AWS?
Sure thing. So, as I said, I've been in the cost optimization and cloud financial management space this entire time. Currently, I'm on a team called Optics. That's Optimization Intelligence for Cloud Systems. It's headed by Alex Head. If you do any kind of Googling, you'll see a lot of our public documentation or Twitch shows. Want to make sure we give a shout out for that. Essentially, our organization is focused on growing CFM best practices and FinOps best practices with our customer base, identifying cost optimization solutions for said customers, and just helping them achieve their goals with AWS.
Bryson, CFM, Cloud Financial Management, correct?
Correct.
Now, what's the difference between the two of them, and is there a difference?
Sure thing. I would say that there are definitely people that think that there are a difference and they're pretty ardent about them being a difference. Primarily, cloud financial management stems back to like cost well architected pillars that AWS has. FinOps is more of an industry term going all around the culture of how you as a financial professional work with the public cloud.
Bryson, you want to talk to me a little bit more? What is your day-to-day activities like underneath the optics team?
Sure thing. So day to day, we are very customer focused. So anytime any issue comes up with that my customer is experiencing, say RI issue, savings plan issue, cost optimization issue, anything that happens, we are there and we are on call to make sure it gets solved. On a weekly basis, we are really focused on building out that FinOps culture at the customer for how it works for them. So that could be planning and setting up engagement events, doing in-person immersion days, collaborating with AWS partners or stakeholders to make sure that customer questions get answered quickly. Anything that helps the customer succeed.
Bryson, I love how you mentioned reserve instances because our topic and something we're going to dive into a lot are reserve instances and convertible reserve instances. Now, before we do that, how about we tell us what were you doing before AWS?
Sure. So before AWS, back 2017 when I joined, I was in transportation logistics outside of Chicago. Transportation logistics essentially is how does stuff get from point A to point B? Within that role, my role was primarily focused on doing what we call continuous improvement. So end to end of the pickup to the drop off to the pickup of the empty box. How do we ensure that we are both uh, reducing turn time, improving customer satisfaction for that turn time, reducing fees or errors or load problems, making the system run smoother and faster.
Bryson, how about we jump to our topic and let's talk about CRIs, but I want the audience to understand the difference between CRIs, which are convertible reserve instances, and normal reserve instances. What's the difference between the two?
Great question. So a reserved instance is essentially a 1 year to 3 year commitment for a steady state usage in the cloud. Now, I say steady state, that's essentially where you're going to save the most amount of money for with the RI, but you don't need to have a steady state workload to maintain benefits of the RI. Essentially, you're paying for a 1 or 3 year commitment for a 24/7 every hour coverage of your AWS usage. Now, a convertible RI is one where you can convert or exchange, say, what is being covered by that RI over time. What we mean by that is that when RIs first came out, you would have to select, say, US West 2, Linux, Unix, C5.large shared tenancy, and you'd be locked into that for 1 or 3 years. You're going to cover that. You're going to receive a discount of up to, I believe, the public documentation is 50, 60% on that instance for 1 or 3 years. Now, over that 1 or 3 year time frame, you're only going to be covering that C5 US West 2 instance. Now, we do have certain things like size flexibility if you're using Linux, Unix instances on shared or default tenancy where you can scale up and down in the family. But still, US West 2 C5, you're there for 1 year to 3 years. Now, a convertible instance is one wherein you can go in and you can change or exchange that reserved instance to cover a different instance type. So you need to stay within the same region, always US West 2, but you can go from C5 to R5, or you could take advantage of moving to Graviton to go C6G.large. Now, by doing that, you're now enabling your commitment mechanism, the RI, to cover and give you a discount on your workload. That enables your developers to not be locked into that 1 or 3 year time frame, and they can move on accordingly.
Bryson, are there any advantages or disadvantages between reserve instances and CRIs?
Good question. So standard RIs, that we'll call them SRIs, they offer a higher discount compared to CRIs. That being said, because you are locking into a 1 or 3 year term on that instance configuration, AWS is going to give you a higher discount. CRIs provide less of a discount than SRIs, but they give you that flexibility in modifying them throughout the term.
Bryson, are there some things that you should take into consideration when trying to implement CRIs or purchase CRIs versus RIs?
Great question. So now I do want to call out at the beginning that standard RIs and convertible RIs exist only on EC2. We do offer standard RIs for RDS, Elasticache, OpenSearch, etc., but the convertible RI solution we're offering only is on EC2. Also on EC2, AWS released savings plans and compute savings plans and instance savings plans a few years ago, and I highly recommend your user base to check those out if they're considering RIs, because savings plans offer a much more flexible saving solution over the time. Now going back, things to consider about CRIs versus SRIs: you need to nail down the two components, the time frame and the conversion ability. Now with the CRI, you are going to be locked into that total term value of that lease. So we say call it a lease for the RI for the time frame. Because of that, you need to know, one, just at the beginning of buying it, what you want to use in the first time. So say you're doing the US 2 C5. We agree with the SRI and the CRI. Great, C5, cover it. Now, you're only going to want to consider a CRI if you want the flexibility of modifying, proper term is exchanging, that C5 to something else within the 1 or 3 years. That requires you to have good conversations with your development and engineering teams to ensure that you and them are on the same page, your purchasing team and your development team. If you're not going to exchange it within those 1 or 3 years, you're going to save more money with the SRI. If, however, your team is going to exchange or is looking at doing a modification, going to Graviton, going to AMD, going to Ice Lake, Sapphire Rapids, the CRI is going to ensure that you can modify it. Now, things to consider with CRIs: you are responsible for the total term value of that lease for that time frame. What I mean is you take the hourly cost of that instance, multiplied out by the hours in the term, boom, that's what you're committed to. When you want to exchange, you can only ever stay the same or go up. You cannot go down with CRI values. So say you're running a C5.large and you cover it 100% with the CRI, and you want to go to C6G large. Public documentation shows that there's a pricing decrease of say 20% on that. You are going to need to now cover more because you have excess amount of your RI lease. Now, it's a great thing. You can now take that lease and you can cover both the Graviton instance, and you can give a little bit more to another team that might be running, say, a T2 Mini, T2 Nano. You can cover other stuff with that excess, but you need to know that going into it.
Wow, Bryson, I didn't actually know that. Where if it was a discount, if I went for another CRI and it was maybe a 20% discount, I can still take the leftover and cover other EC2 instances that other teams might be utilizing within my company or within my account. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, that's correct. It's one of the many benefits of a CRI offering. Now, you do need to understand how CRIs work, so I do highly encourage your user base to read up on the documentation about them. But essentially what you're looking at is you'd be splitting your lease through the modification API, and then you can, after splitting that lease, you can exchange the unused portion of that CRI to cover some other instance type.
Bryson, now the terms for a CRI or an SRI are pretty much the same with a 1 or 3 year, correct? Except for a convertible allows you to exchange it for another of maybe, I don't want to say lesser value, but more value, right? Or at least equal.
Correct. Always equal or greater. Now,
Yep.
both SRIs and CRIs are 1 or 3 year term commitments, and they both offer all upfront, partial upfront, and no upfront payment terms.
Is there any benefit when selecting no upfront, partial, or all upfront when it comes to CRIs?
So I'd say they're the same with SRIs in that AWS is going to give you the biggest discount the longer your commitment is and the more money you're putting up front. So all upfront 3 years obviously going to have a higher discount than a 1 year no upfront. Now, what you really need to have this conversation with is your finance team. You need to understand for your own company, what is your cash strategy? Are you operating in a capital strategy where you're okay to do all upfront purchases and get the highest return on that upfront cash? Or are you cash flow constrained where you really care about just having enough money every month so you want to go no upfront so you can just treat it the exact same way as normal instance usage? That slightly gets into chargeback territory where it's much easier to do chargebacks on no upfront RIs, standard or CRI, than it is upfront because every month in your CUR, you're going to get that line item.
Bryson, I know this is the Faces in FinOps podcast, and we've been really talking a lot about SRIs and CRIs when it comes to, like AWS
hmm
and the value with those. How can I ask, or what's the best way to ask this question on how this comes into play with regards to FinOps?
Sure. So with regards to FinOps, if I just, in the simplest terms, engineering teams want to engineer. Builders want to build, and they don't want to be constrained or having to deal with budgets, finances, 1 or 3 year forecasts. They want to just make the best platform they can using AWS services. Then you have your finance team. Now, FinOps has been evolving very fast over the past few years, but if we go back, say, to when I started 2017, 2018, these are really financial instruments. You're talking 1 or 3 year timeframes, you're talking about amortization schedules, you're talking about financial capital forecasting. That merger of them is really, I guess, the shining example of what FinOps is in the public cloud space. Merging of engineering forecasts of the platform and where it's going to go, and able to translate that into financial terms.
Bryson, let's talk about FinOps a little bit more and some of the customers that you're working with or what you're seeing out in the environment. Are you seeing them utilize a lot of CRIs in their environment, a mixture of CRIs and SRIs? How does each one come into play when it comes with customers with regards to FinOps?
Sure thing. Great question. Now, the overarching trend that I see is customers are moving to savings plans. Savings plans offer a 1 or 3 year commitment where AWS will automatically attach or attribute the discount to your running instances for your hourly commitment. That offloads the work required to exchange the RIs, right? So it offloads a ton of work that either customers had to do or the partners had to do in managing your commitment fleet, RIs or savings plans. That's where the trend's going. Now, outside of that, like a sub bullet, for non EC2 services, RDS, Elasticache, OpenSearch, Redshift, DynamoDB, SRIs still exist, and customers are still taking advantage of those to get to significant savings. CRIs do not exist anywhere except EC2. The third sub bullet, some customers are still on the RI platform, and some customers might choose to be on the RI platform because they might have internal budgetary requirements that they prefer RIs. It's like one benefit that you could debate about RIs versus savings plans is with an RI, you almost can always expect what you're going to get. The say with the SRI, if it's covering just that C5 for the total time frame, that is a public known discount of X. You're going to get X throughout the entire time frame, 1 or 3 years, as long as it's utilized. Similar with the CRI, you're going to get X discount for the time frame until it's exchanged. Then once you exchange it, you're going to get Y discount until it's exchanged. That's very, very nice for finance teams to be able to forecast saying we paid this, we get this return, done for a time frame. While savings plans do take out the manual or partner effort into applying ROIs to usage, they do not give that 100% perfect, I'm going to get 30% off. Now, you can easily track it during the curry. You can see it to an hourly basis. You can easily know that you're running something that has X discount with a savings plan. You just don't have it, I'd say, like set in stone. It's going to fluctuate and apply to your running usage to give you the best discount possible every hour. Now, that might wind up being over 1 or 3 years, the exact same thing. You get the exact same savings, even with some cherry on top because it grabbed better instances and hours when it came up. It's just when you talk about that financial planning aspect.
You said savings plans, you said SRIs, and you mentioned that some are going to stick with RIs if they need to, if there's any budgetary constraints. But you didn't talk CRIs. Where do you see CRIs coming into play in the future?
Sure, CRIs in the future. I'm not on the EC2 team, so I can't speculate on their roadmap, but I would suspect that the majority of your customers are continue moving towards savings plans. While CRIs still offer that ability to exchange and get that commitment, I'm going to see more and more probably from the financial suite down a pressure to stick with the SRI for the guaranteed high value discount or go all the way to the automated solution savings plans.
Well, savings plans came out in 2019, and I know it's been kind of a trend to go towards them. But do they offer the same flexibility and exchange as the CRIs?
Even more. So the biggest benefit from a savings plan in the CRI is the savings plan is going to automatically apply itself to usage. So whereas with the CRI, a human or an algorithm or something would have to first determine what was I using. Okay, let me set my RIs, my RI fleet to cover that portion and then maintain visibility on it over time, constantly exchanging those RIs to match the usage. Savings plan does that automatically. You are going to gain the highest savings amount with savings plans over CRIs when you factor in the actual manual cost of people work.
Bryson, if somebody wants to learn more about savings plans, can they find out more information?
Great question. Always start at the AWS public website looking through our documentation. It's going to probably take you directly to Cost Explorer, and that's going to have a wealth of information both about your current usage and potential opportunities that you have. After you've seen that and read up to understand where you're at and what you can do, highly recommend you reach out either to your partner space or your AWS account team to get more information.
Bryson, where do you see this coming into play when it comes to AWS partners who do a lot of automation around not only your RIs, your CRIs? And I know they were allowing it at one time with savings plans, but I don't think it's allowed to kind of do that exchange within the accounts. Where do you see partners coming into play with some of this?
Sure. I know partners for long times have had a very rock solid ability in managing customers, let's call them commitment fleets. Because very frequently, especially with our larger customers, those commitments can scale up. It's a lot of work to manage that many leases, with some customers having multiple thousands of these leases. Now, partners have a great space to play where they can both do the management of them, being reporting on utilization, expected savings, coverage, potential opportunities to save more, all of which you can also get from the Cost Explorer of the Curve, but partners do a lot of work in that space. Where they might be going more in these spaces is finding places where you can, one, squeeze out the most of that savings plan commitment, where you can get the biggest bang for your dollar with, say, custom commitments, where you can find ways to either nail specifically on getting X return for your dollar in this like 1 year or 3 year, or you can hit really targets you have for your finance. The second piece is partners can really accelerate how easy or hard it is to do chargebacks or custom billing chargeback after CUR. While the savings plan is going to apply itself to any of your running usage in the CUR, you as a FinOps person or practitioner might want to apply those savings plan savings in a different way than AWS automatically distributed them. You might want to pull out that savings plan savings benefit and put it somewhere else. Partners can do a great place of work there.
Bryson, talk to me a little bit more about managing these commitments as it relates to FinOps within a company that already has a lot of commitments under usage, and they're trying to implement a FinOps culture within the environment. How do they manage all these commitments and still achieve the end result of implementing FinOps?
Sure. The first place I want to start is understanding your company's corporate structure, right? Now, that might sound boring or out of like a busy con book, but you need to make sure that you're making FinOps work for where you're at. Your company culture and your company structure is going to dictate how you can operate with the public cloud, much more than, say, just what a best practice is. A best practice is always going to be the best practice, but if you have certain like regulatory guidelines, industry guidelines, if you're a public sector customer that has to go by like the Fed's new guidance, that's going to take priority. From that, you need to understand what are your stakeholders' main goals. So if you are just in the FinOps space, let's just take a generic example. You need to understand procurement's outlook and their goals, finance's outlook and their goals, your C-suite and where they're trying to direct, and your engineering team's outlook and their goals. From that, you can find where you're in to say, okay, my procurement team, say, has set the commitments on our SRI, CRI savings plans at Y. I have budget to go from Y to X. Going from Y to X is determined by my finance team. They need ABC level of approval to make me do that. In order to get ABC, I need to make sure that I'm in locksync with my engineering team to make sure that they know ABC. Building up those mechanisms internal to your company is what's going to make you successful so that all your parties are aligned, they all know what's going on, and they're all able to celebrate the wins when it happens.
Bryson, what are some of your recommendations on managing these commitments? Is it something that needs to be managed weekly, monthly, yearly?
Great question. With RIs, just from my experience, this was something I did daily. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do it, but for customers of a very large size, you can quickly change. If an engineering team has not like maintained that mechanism of talking up and down the chain, you can quickly see a decrease in those savings or coverage. Now, at a minimum, I would highly suggest that customers get into a practice of checking on these weekly. The sooner the better. If you can set up automated alerts, if you're using either a partner that has automated alarms or you set up AWS budget alarm, even better. But at a minimum, you want to check these weekly, preferably daily. Now, from that, you also want to roll that into your regular corporate reporting structure. If you do weekly business reviews, if you do monthly business reviews, if you are on a quarterly cadence, you want to make sure that all your reporting on your cash out the door, total remaining commitments, amortized cost of commitments, and estimated and realized savings all aligns with that structure so that there's no static or friction.
Bryson, can you talk to me a little bit more about, as a beginner point of view, what are some recommendations for me to get started utilizing some of these commitment based?
Great question. I would first start, as always, read the documentation. AWS has a good number of public documentation out there, both on SRIs, CRIs, and savings plans. Read up on it as much as you can and jot down any things that don't make sense. The second point, try as much as you can to think of this in terms of metaphors. Now, the cloud is the cloud, but these are billing constructs on top of the cloud. The faster you can understand what these offerings are and talk to the other people about them to get them to understand it, the easier life will be. Third, reach out to your AWS account team if you have one, your partner team, or other folks that are more tenured about AWS where you are to understand where are you at today. Do you have no RIs and SPs at all? Do you have a huge amount? Is there already a mechanism in place? Do you operate on a certain buying schedule? Figure out what's happening with your company today. I think I'm on fourth now. Utilize the existing and native AWS tools or your partner provided tools to understand what you have today and where the opportunity is. So if you're using just AWS, hop into Cost Explorer. In Cost Explorer, we have ready-made reports that can show you your coverage, your utilization, and then any recommendations for usage to cover it from there. Once you have that, that's enough to get into a room with some of your engineering managers to help them understand where you can go later.
Bryson, looking ahead, where do you see cost optimization or maybe some of the biggest challenges or opportunities? And I would say the next few years, but I'm going to say the next few months.
Good question. Really, we're talking about where companies are and how mature they are, both in their FinOps and on the public cloud itself. Now, if you are at a company that may not be as mature in its FinOps space, so you don't have some of these mechanisms, you might not have a great communication style between these teams, that's ground zero. So the challenge for them now is being able to build up that mechanism and that strength as the world is moving on even faster. Like, I know no one likes admin work and meetings feel like that, but it is paramount. The second side, on the technological side, it's ensuring that your savings mechanisms are keeping pace with what your teams are doing. So again, giving a shout out for savings plans, things that automatically attach themselves to the highest savings in usage in that hour. That's going to be key if your teams are testing, if they're messing with new instances that just came out after reInvent, if they're doing a dev test environment looking with, I don't know, they're exploring the difference between AMD, Intel, and Graviton. That's going to be key. Then, if I try to look future space, understanding where undifferentiated heavy lifting can be taken off your plate. So just like savings plans did with RIs and applying, where else is that going to happen with other cost optimization opportunities like EBS volumes or storage?
Bryson, I know I've got to ask this question, and we got to talk about AI. Do you see AI having an impact on commitment based discounts if they aren't already?
I would think that's a solid answer of yes. Now, you have both the AI of the managing it. So I know partners have already evolved in this space. I know AWS has already looked at it with the curve, but you have both the management of existing commitments. So if you have any kind of AI program on your partner or your own company that's managing the RI, doing the modifications, exchanges naturally, or buying savings plans as they come up, that exists. The second part is then forecasting needs in the future. So any kind of AI that's going to come out where it's saying, going one step above, say just, oh, we have on demand, let's buy a savings plan. Do we expect that on demand to continue going? We see that on demand is tagged in this way. Do we think that's going to go this way? We see that on demand is running of this instance type, but Compute Optimizer said that's underutilized in this way. Could we first modify that to right size it and then buy a savings plan? There's a whole gamut of ways that AI is going to be evolving in this space.
What about AI as it relates to FinOps, though?
I'd say my initial thought is that it's going to first start with the undifferentiated heavy lifting. So any kind of regular reporting that folks have to do, that's a great place to start leaning on AI to help you generate. WBRs, MBRs, QBRs, anything where you're reporting back out to stakeholders, progress and opportunities, great. Second place, next step is then you might want to call it letting off the reins a bit, where you are enabling that AI that you've built out to start making actions on your behalf. So if that is taking existing GP2 volumes and modifying them to GP3, that's one step. If it's automatically exchanging your CRIs, that's another step. If it's automatically setting up, uh, moving things from standard storage, or you're checking out ways to flag to put it into intelligent, a third step.
Now, Bryson, before we wrap things up, I got a couple more questions for you. One, what advice would you give somebody who's starting out in their FinOps journey?
Sure. Ask as many questions as you can. and being open to learn as much as you can from those around you. The second being, I like to approach situations where I am not the most educated or in the loop in the room. I'm there to help everyone else be successful, so I'm there to hear from them first. If you take that attitude with as much reading and research as ahead of time, you're going to be much more successful.
Bryson, that's some sound advice. What other advice or some recommendations for those might be coming into some common challenges when they're trying to implement FinOps?
Great question. Now, with common challenges, be aware of easy buttons, I call it. Now, AWS, in building out a customer-centric platform and provider, makes it very easy for you to see your on-demand usage, see where you could get a recommendation, and purchase said recommendation. Now, outside, of course, of your own company's corporate governance and IAM permissions, it's fairly straightforward for you to go to Cost Explorer, see an opportunity, and buy it and fix it. Make sure that you are doing all your due diligence before you do any actions in the real world. You need to know, what is procurement doing, what's finance planning, what is your engineering planning before you pull that trigger. Second challenge, make sure that while all the new things might be coming out to play, all the new services are coming out, being released, it's very exciting. Make sure you're covering your low-hanging fruit first. It might seem extremely boring. It might seem like it's 4 years old, but making sure you're covering your low-hanging fruit at the onset and you understand how to identify it and optimize it first is going to yield more dividends and earn trust with your stakeholders and going to get you more comfortable with the console itself. Finally, third, if you're using any kind of pre-programmed reporting or any of our amazing partners that are out there, make sure you do your diligence to understand how those outputs come to be. So just because someone somewhere is able to give you a report of opportunities or spend or usage, make sure you know how that came to be, the logic or the ETL that's being applied to it, so you know what happens if you don't, like the numbers don't jive, and how you can recreate it on your end. That way you're going to be able to speak much more confidently to that report and any other reports that you're able to provide and go after opportunities faster.
I think that goes to speak to trusting the data that's being produced or being reported upon. Because if there is any point in time that the data does not show or is not accurate, the trust is lost. And then making changes or implementing anything within the FinOps community or culture is a little bit of a hesitant to do it, right? Because there's some risks associated with it because you're not sure if the data is correct and reported.
Exactly. No one likes having conversations about if a dollar is actually a dollar.
That's straight out of the Cloud FinOps book. When a dollar is not a dollar. Bryson, before I wrap it up a little bit more, there are mature companies out there who have implemented FinOps time and time again or have a very successful implementation, but they've come across some challenges along their way. Are there anything that you might have seen them make that can help improve somebody that already has FinOps within the organization and implemented so they could steer clear from it?
Sure, great question. I would encourage your readers to read, top of my head, I'm thinking the Cap One has a blog and DoorDash have blogs where they're really focused on cultures that they've implemented there. Uh, I can't remember if it's both those companies or neither, but making sure that you are instituting a proper culture of, say, praise. So now the name and shame game might work for some corporate companies. It might work for some industries where you have to stick to your budgets and this. Other companies have found that over time, the more decentralized they get, the faster they grow. Name and shame doesn't always work. You want to be providing your people the ability to run fast and run at the correct North Star. From that, learning how to be flexible. So just because you set a top-down goal for the year of migrating everything to Graviton 2, stuff happens. Like things happen. You need to be flexible in modifying your goals as appropriate and reacting to the needs of the day and the needs of the quarter. And then once you've done that, celebrating both reactively, the wins that happened, the lessons learned that had happened, and then continuing to move forward on the North Star. From that, we'd probably want to segue into talking about business KPIs, setting a KPI as the correct North Star for whatever you're doing. But I'd just lean on that. Stay flexible, keep moving forward.
Well, defining the proper KPIs, are there a standard set of KPIs provided by the FinOps or the implementation that you should be following, or are they unique to each type of company?
I'd say a both and. So very common KPIs that I don't know if they're published in AWS blogs, but ones that we talk a lot about are net cost per normalized EC2 or compute unit. Also net cost per total storage GB per month. These are KPIs where you can track in a simple graph, is my total cost per X going up or down? Now to your second point, unique to each business, While that KPI does represent something, oh, our net cost per virtual compute power is going down. That's great. It doesn't answer the next question. So what? Even though like our cost is going down, that doesn't directly correlate. Did you launch more applications? Do you have more users? Are you servicing your company's needs where they are? You're going to need, as a FinOps practitioner, to find ways to translate the billing and usage data that AWS and partners provide you into those business-centric KPIs.
Bryson, can you tell me why it feels like FinOps has become so important or so visible now versus when it came about 3-4 years ago?
Great question. I would probably, if I wanted to give a really good answer, I'd want to read up on public documentation or news outlets about the speed of adoption of the cloud. I would say, as we know with most things technology, things accelerate faster and faster every year. So as we've seen both the need for technology, the interconnectedness of our world around us, more and more companies are realizing that moving to the public cloud is a good and well-grounded option. From that, as they move to the cloud, start migrating from on-prem to AWS or other providers, or start launching net new workloads in AWS once they've realized how much it can do, you can quickly outpace your finance team. If your finance team is not aware of FinOps practices, if they're not aware of doing IT investment in the cloud versus an on-prem rack and stack, you're going to see that need very, very quick. I think that need is what has fueled that FinOps acceleration.
Finance used to hold the keys to procurement. They used to want to say, yes, you can go ahead and purchase this. Yes, you can go play with this new tool. Yes, you can go install this new service. And now engineers have the power, the buying decision for them to do it. And it's totally flipped things around. And this is where I think FinOps comes into play, is that engineers need to talk to finance and need to talk to the business so that they understand what is happening from their application deployment, the needs of the business, and the costs associated with everything. And they need to be on top of it with their reporting structure, and not a weekly or monthly, but a daily type of thing. And you can't tackle it all at once.
Mm-hmm. Great power, great responsibility.
I like that. Well, that's actually going to wrap up for our final question. And this is going to be a fun question for you. Now, you're going to have to think really, 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 really hard, because it's very important. And yes, we're recording this in January after the holidays, so you might still be a little sluggish from the holidays. But if you didn't have to be here right now, and I'm talking about AWS because you want to be on the podcast, where would you be?
Great question. I think if I look at what we've done over the past few years, my wife and I, we currently have 3 rescue pets. We've got 1 cat and 2 dogs. Both have kind of fallen into our laps over the course of our lives. From that, if we weren't at AWS, I'd probably be saying we're going full hard into animal rescue, animal rehabilitation.
Nice. I like that. Most people say like a vacation or something like that, but you're right into the pets. That is very admirable that you want to do that, and I hope someday you get there.
Thanks, John.
Well, Bryson, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a great discussion around SRIs, CRIs, FinOps, the implementation, and all the best practices around that. Your knowledge is definitely valuable. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me.
All right, everybody, this has been another awesome episode and discussion around the Faces In FinOps podcast, powered by our great friends at ProsperOps. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify, and also check out the ProsperOps blog, because guess what? We're out of here.